that employment brings.
Now I call the spokesman for the SNP, Chris Stephens.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I first of all refer the House to my register of members' interests, as I'll be making some remarks about public sector pay. But can I say firstly, Mr the Deputy Speaker, I said in this House a couple of years ago, I made a comparison that the government was rather like those wicked characters in the period drama Poldark, the Warleggans. I didn't quite realise, Mr Deputy Speaker, that that was a premonition on my part, because once again we have a budget which benefits the rich on the backs of the very poor. And the real issue here is what the budget doesn't say, and a huge disappointment it was, because ministers confirmed this week that they are reneging on the promise that was given to me 3 years ago to publish the Department of Work and Pensions review of the factors driving food bank usage. Now, the Chancellor referred repeatedly in his speech to the Prime Minister's ambitions and objectives. One which the Chancellor didn't mention was the Prime Minister's stated wish to eliminate the need for food banks. Why no mention? Why no review? And why no costed plan to deliver on that particular ambition? The most vulnerable, yet again, being failed by the government, those who are failed by the state. Now, what possible reason or reasons is there for not publishing what should be vital research to address the very factors which turn too many of our citizens across these islands to turn to food aid provision? Is it because, Mr Deputy Speaker, the very factors that do so are the responsibility of the government itself? Because as the trade union, the Public and Commercial Services Trade Union, of which I am a parliamentary chair, reminded us that over 40,000 civil servants, that's those on the government's own payroll, are having to resort to using food aid provision. We also know that those relying on food aid provision are often people who have received a sanction by the Department of Work and Pensions. And can I say that those who also use food aid provision actually work for the Department of Work and Pensions? So those responsible and those employed for delivering benefits to the poorest are often having to utilise food aid provision themselves. And yet the budget tells us in no uncertain terms that more people will be sanctioned, not less. It's very hard to come to any other conclusion that the failure by ministers to publish its own research onto food bank usage is because of decisions made by ministers past, and I regret to say, present. Now, we had an exchange with the Secretary of State on sanctions when he said that there are some circumstances in which sanctions were appropriate. But however, in the last year we know that sanctions have skyrocketed as a result of their own figures. And in response to recent parliamentary questions, the Department of Work and Pensions has said it would incur disproportionate cost. Yes, that's a written question which has an answer, disproportionate cost. I know that's unusual for some members, but yes, it said it would incur disproportionate cost to find out how many children are living in households where a sanction has been applied, how many people living in a sanctioned household are receiving hardship payments, how many people with a sanction have a medical condition, or how many people were in hospital or attending a medical appointment where they were deemed to have failed to comply and were therefore sanctioned. And I'll give way tomorrow morning.
I thank my friend for giving way. He's talking about the impact and the scale of sanctions. Does he agree with me that the people who are sanctioned are pushed further and further into poverty, which actually goes against the government's own stated objective of getting people into work? The further in poverty you are, the more difficult it is to enter the workplace.
Yeah. Well, that is exactly what happens. And also what is happening is that when people receive sanctions, they then miss out on cost of living payments. So it's not just one punishment, it's a double punishment, and that, again, is pushing people into poverty. I'll give way.
I have enormous respect for the honourable gentleman, as he knows, but I do genuinely just wish to clarify one point. Is the honourable gentleman at least saying that there are some circumstances under which a sanction is appropriate?
I'm going to come on to that, and yes, I will say that. But how can it be humane, Mr Deputy Speaker, when the ramping up of sanctions without knowing the basic facts that members of this House are asking questions on, about how many children are living in households where a sanction has been applied, for example. And will the Secretary of State not accept that with more people now at risk of being sanctioned, it's now the right time to roll out the yellow card system or the benefit warning system, as many of us have been arguing, to ensure the misfortune does not lead to people being destitute? So there are some things which the Secretary of State could do before sanctions are applied. And I do believe that a warning system and a yellow card system would go some way towards that, and that would help people into work. But the Department did consider it. We thought, when I was on the Select Committee, that they were heading in that direction, and then they changed course. And perhaps the Secretary of State may want to look at that again, because I would encourage him to look at the great work that the Select Committee had done on this issue, and suggesting that a warning system, or referring to it as the yellow card system, would be appropriate. Because the fact remains, Mr Deputy Speaker, for those struggling on low incomes, the measures in yesterday's budget require them to jump through extra hoops, like attending job centres even when they're working, and what we agree are vital roles, like, for example, a teaching assistant or a care worker. That the earnings threshold is more than doubled in the space of just a year, and this puts hundreds of thousands of people more at risk of benefit sanctions, when we know that sanctions do not work, either ethically, practically or economically. And the Chancellor needs to understand, no matter what he's promising for the future, far too many people are struggling to survive now. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, there remains a large degree of scepticism about the employment support package which the Secretary of State has said today, and the Chancellor referred to yesterday. Now, some believe that tighter sanctions will likely be a disaster for people on universal credit, and it won't help people into high-quality work, as my honourable friend from North Ayrshire and Aaron alluded to earlier. The Federation of Small Businesses have said that proposals to help people with poor health to go back to work are ill-designed and poorly thought out, and some won't happen for years. Those with health conditions and disability have been let down by a government that's ignored employers' views and what can best help. Small measures on subsidising occupational health are welcome, but not the big bang needed. Measures on over 50s are token efforts at best, and the principle of what's announced in childcare is positive, but the Achilles heel of this government is in the delivery. So, as the Federation of Small Businesses say, they'll believe it when they see it. And the Royal Institute of Blind People have said that for those of working age, employment should be a route to coping with rising costs, but they remain of the view that urgent action is needed to fix the Access to Work scheme. A scheme where right now thousands of people are facing severe delays of many months to get the support and equipment they need to do their jobs. And I do hope that the Secretary of State will note the comments from the Royal National Institute of Blind People, because access to work is clearly not helping enough people, and the delays are stopping people from getting into work. Now, not all are convinced that the childcare reforms will help get people into work. So even if the money is there to pay for childcare, there is no workforce, which are very badly paid, to deliver it. The universal credit changes in the administrative earnings threshold will mean more DWP staff caught up in in-work conditionality. So, as well as creating swathes of extra work for staff in job centres. No mention in the budget about whether there is going to be any extra staff to deliver what we believe will be huge amounts of additional work. And the Secretary of State is saying there will be, and while he's answering that question, perhaps he can answer the question as to what pay rise he's going to give DWP staff as well, who took industrial action yesterday. I'm chair of the PCS Parliamentary Group. My union is Unison, of which I'm a proud member, to answer the Minister's question. So I would have thought he would have done his research to know that. But perhaps there's a very real need for civil service pay to be addressed, as I'll come to later on. Another issue that's not been tackled is the issue of deductions. One measure that would have cost the government very little, but also could have resulted in many fewer people needing to use food banks, was to ease significantly the rate of deductions from universal credit. Better still would have been to waive deductions resulting from official error, or to introduce a one-off amnesty on deductions. Why no action on this, when that's the single biggest factor affecting people going to food banks. And despite almost half of all households in universal credit now facing a deduction during the last 6-month period ending January 2023, just 14 cases were fully waived and a further 5 cases were partially waived. So will the Secretary of State revise the guidance to ensure that every household subject to a deduction is automatically informed of the right to request a waiver? Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, I'm going to come on to public sector pay because there is absolutely nothing in the budget on public sector pay. As the Prime Minister sorts out his swimming pool heating, it's incredible that public swimming pools were the only public services mentioned for supports in the budget speech. While the pension cap cuts may help our NHS retained doctors, this could have been limited to medicine or the NHS rather than a lifetime tax cut for the wealthy. The only mention was that cutting public sector debt would lead to more money for public services without actually announcing more money. Public sector pay bodies noted that only a 3.5% pay rise is affordable under current Treasury allocation, and they chose not to put anything else to address this. That is, as the Institute for Fiscal Studies said, a political choice. Yes. And as the Trade Union Congress have said, the lack of support for public services and for public pay is the elephant in the room, saying that the budget is going nowhere near a high-wage and a high-skills economy. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are strikes all over the country, and it is striking that there was nothing said and there's nothing here about them. Public transport, public health, even public sector TV hosts are on strike. But the government seems to want to fight a culture war over Gary Lineker than pay attention to ensure our public services have the funds they need. Mr Deputy Speaker, in closing, the government is again scrambling to fix the economic problems of its own making. Yesterday's budget has come to a huge disappointment to people, businesses and charities left paying for the UK government's mistakes. There is this selective amnesia that the government had created a crash a few months ago, but they haven't yet said sorry for it. And as far as the thing that I do agree with the Chancellor on, he said that independence is always better than dependence. Yes. We couldn't have put that any better ourselves.
Order.